know that time, like a rebellious teenager, refuses to stay constant? It's a curious thing, time. We attempt to harness it, to control it, and yet it dances away, always just out of reach. One way we've tried to tame this wild beast is through the concept of daylight saving time. Born out of a desire to make the most of the daylight hours, it's a practice where we audaciously decide to move the hands of our clocks forward an hour for a portion of the year. It's as if we're cheekily telling the sun, we'll decide when it's time to rise and set, thank you very much. You might be surprised to learn that less than half of the world's countries actually observe daylight saving time. That's right, the majority of nations have looked at this practice and said, no thank you, we'll stick with constant time. So, the next time you're late, just blame it on the shifting sands of time. Believe it or not, daylight saving time wasn't invented by a time traveler, but by a bug collector. Yes, you heard that right. Our tale begins in the late 19th century with a man named George Vernon Hudson. Now, George wasn't an inventor or a scientist or a Time Lord. No, he was an entomologist. That's a fancy word for a bug collector. You see, George was a bit of a night owl and he loved his bugs, but he also loved the daylight. He wanted more time in the sun to collect his beloved insects. So, being the clever chap that he was, he came up with a rather brilliant idea. Why not shift the clocks forward, in spring and back in autumn? This way he'd have more daylight to hunt his bugs and the rest of the world would get an extra hour of daylight too. A win-win, right? In 1895, George presented his idea to the Wellington Philosophical Society in New Zealand. Can you imagine the faces on those folks? You want to do what with time? Move it forward and then back again? Are you mad, man? But George was adamant. He argued that his idea would not only give him more bug time, but also save on artificial lighting, thus conserving energy. It took a while, but eventually people started to see the sense in George's proposal. Fast forward to 1918, and daylight saving time was officially adopted in several countries during World War I as a means to conserve fuel. George's idea had finally taken flight, much like the bugs he so loved to collect. And so, in an odd twist of fate, the world found itself adopting the whims of a bug collector. It's funny how things work out, isn't it? A man's passion for bugs led to a global change in how we perceive and use time. And thus, the world decided to mess with time, all thanks to a man and his bugs. Daylight saving time, much like a controversial fashion trend, wasn't universally adopted at once. Picture this. It's the early 20th century, and Germany, ever the trendsetter, decides to spring forward first. Yes, in the midst of World War I, they thought, why not save some daylight? And thus became the first country to officially implement daylight saving time. Soon, other countries started following suit. The United Kingdom, not wanting to be outdone, adopted it the very same year. United States, on the other hand, took its sweet time, joining the Daylight Saving Club only a couple of years later. But not everyone was on board with this trend. Imagine Russia, for instance, sitting in a corner, arms crossed, stubbornly refusing to join the Daylight Saving Party until 1917. Then there was China, who, after trying it on for size in the 1940s, decided it wasn't quite their style and abandoned the practice altogether. Meanwhile, Japan was having an on-again, off-again relationship with daylight saving. They initially adopted it in 1948, only to reject it a few years later, and then flirted with the idea again in the 1970s during the oil crisis. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that a sizable number of countries have retired from the daylight saving time game, finding it more trouble than it's worth. And let's not forget about our friends down under. Australia, ever the rebel, has a mixed approach. Some parts of the country observe daylight saving time, while others steadfastly refuse. It's a bit like having one foot in winter and the other in summer. So you see, the journey of daylight saving time has been far from smooth. It's been embraced, rejected, and sometimes both by different countries around the globe. So while some countries embraced the idea like an old friend, others gave it the cold shoulder. Daylight saving time, much like your favorite dessert, has its sweet and sour sides. Let's delve into the creamy, delightful benefits first, shall we? Imagine daylight saving time as a sumptuous slice of chocolate cake. The extra hour of daylight in the evening is like that rich, velvety layer of chocolate frosting on top. It's brilliant for those who love outdoor activities. It's an invitation to take that extra long evening walk, or perhaps fit in another round of golf. Meanwhile, the reduction in energy consumption is akin to those hidden chunks of dark chocolate in the cake, surprising and beneficial. By shifting our clocks forward, we decrease the need for evening lighting, making a small but significant contribution to the environment. But wait, what's this? A bitter almond hidden in our cake? Ah, yes, the drawbacks of daylight saving time. The most notorious is the disruption to our internal clocks. It's like being served an ice cream sundae when you're expecting a hot cup of tea, a bit of a shock to the system. Many people report feeling groggy and out of sorts for a few days after the clock change. This can lead to a temporary increase in accidents, much like slipping on a banana peel left carelessly on the floor. Moreover, the energy saving is not as significant as you might think, akin to finding out your so-called sugar-free dessert still has calories. While there's a decrease in lighting needs, there's often an increase in heating or air conditioning, depending on the season. And let's not forget about the confusion it causes, especially in this digital age. It's like trying to keep up with the latest food trends. Just when you've got the hang of it, everything changes. So whether you love it or hate it, daylight saving time sure knows how to stir up a conversation. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that daylight saving time still ticks on, despite its fair share of critics. Now, let's take a moment to ponder on the present-day scenario. All around the globe, people dutifully adjust their clocks like clockwork, springing forward and falling back in a dance as old as time itself. Imagine for a moment a world without daylight saving time. Picture the chaos. You'd have people showing up an hour early for work, their faces puzzled as they question their own sanity. Or perhaps an hour late, their faces flushed with embarrassment. The coffee shops would be in disarray, with baristas wondering why their morning rush suddenly shifted. And don't even get me started on the television schedules. Can you imagine missing the grand finale of your favorite show because the clocks didn't change? But let's not forget, daylight saving time isn't just about saving face from potential embarrassment. It's also about saving energy. Yes, that's right. By adjusting our clocks, we make better use of natural daylight and reduce the need for artificial light, making our planet just a little bit happier. Of course, not everyone is a fan. There are those who argue that the disruption to our sleep patterns is detrimental to our health. Others simply don't like the idea of time being toyed with, and who can blame them? Time, after all, is a precious commodity. Yet despite the controversy, daylight saving time persists. It's like that stubborn old grandfather clock in the corner of the room. It may be a bit outdated, it may not be to everyone's taste, but it's a part of our history and our culture. And it's not going anywhere anytime soon, so while we might not all agree on daylight saving time, we can certainly agree that it's been quite the journey. Well folks, that's the long and short of daylight saving time, or as I like to call it, time's annual makeover. From its curious inception during the war years to its widespread adoption and rejection, the journey of daylight saving time has been as fluctuating as the hours it adjusts. The idea of saving daylight, born out of necessity, has now become a global practice, albeit with a fair share of critics and supporters. The pros and cons of daylight saving time continue to fuel debates, yet the practice persists. From energy conservation to improved mental health, the reasons for maintaining this tradition are numerous and varied. The present-day scenario sees a mix of countries following the practice while others have abandoned it, making it a truly fascinating chapter in the history of time. So remember, the next time your clock springs forward or falls back, it's not broken, it's just doing its bit in the never-ending saga of daylight saving time.